good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Carroll. I am a accessibility strategist and field organizer with an organization called Caring Majority Rising. We're a statewide organization we are very active in the Hudson Valley and the Capital Region currently. We're a coalition of people with disabilities like myself, family members, seniors, home care workers, and attendant workers. And we are working on the issue of access to long-term care. Thank you so much for joining us today, especially to members of the press who are taking the time to cover this important issue. So I'm going to ask that everyone hold your questions until the end. We will make time for those, and everyone should be aware that this conversation is being recorded. And if everyone could make sure to keep yourself on mute unless you're talking, that would really help us out. Thank you so much. So again, I'm from Caring Majority Rising, and our coalition is our members are particularly affected by barriers to voting. So we're talking about accessibility at polling sites, accessibility of absentee ballots. Poor people with disabilities tend to rely on public transportation and pedestrianism to get where we need to go. And so Caring Majority Rising is particularly supportive of disability rights, voter rights, and our democratic process. Today, we're calling upon the Board of Elections in Dutchess County to make changes to a particular polling site to enfranchise more voters and move it to a more accessible location for voters with disabilities, to students, and to the community at large. I'm going to, in turn, introduce several speakers today, the first of which is Keith Gerge. Keith is a systems advocate at the Resource Center for Accessible Living. Thank you, Keith.
Hello, thanks everybody for coming today. As Catherine said, I'm the systems advocate at RCAL, that's our acronym, Resource Center for Accessible Living. I myself am an individual with a disability from a spinal cord injury in 2009, as I'm a quadriplegic, and so voting access is close to my heart. So RCAL and all independent living centers, we serve individuals of any disability, any age, and try to keep them in the community in the most integrated setting appropriate to their need. That's our core focus. And many of the rights that stem from that, whether it's education, housing, election reform, healthcare, transportation, etc. I have an agenda in front of me. So why is it so important? Friends, family members, I have a physical need to get into the polling site, and then I have dexterity issues, obviously, so I need to use the ballot marking device, which has a special assistive technology, sip and puff straw, that allows me to vote independently and privately to mark my ballot and have asked. So that's the way I vote. And even absentee voting obviously has problems with individuals with dexterity issues and visual impairments because they can't see the ballot and they cannot correctly mark it. New York State has moved a little closer into being accessible in the absentee ballot realm. Individuals can now request a PDF, a fillable PDF ballot that they can mark with assistive technology on their own computer and then print out and send to the Board of Elections. And as mentioned, or maybe not yet, but the issue with the barred polling site in Red Hook not being accessible, there is a sign-on letter that we're asking individuals beyond this group to sign on to have the Red Hook Episcopal St. John's Church moved because it's not accessible. And you can email Catherine if you're interested in signing on. There are many laws that cover this, but I believe our next speaker is going to cover that, Alex, but the ADA covers places of public accommodation and state and government run businesses and entities. So elections are covered under the ADA, And so that's why I'm here to give our council support behind this cause. And that's my spiel. I guess if we want to move on to Alex.
Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing your personal experience with voting. And I think it's important for everyone to know that accessible voting doesn't just happen, that very specific measures need to be in place to ensure that everyone can access the ballot and cast their vote. Next, I would like to introduce Alexander Thompson. Alexander is a disabled Hudson Valley resident, a poll worker, and chapter advocacy representative of United Spinal Hudson Valley chapter. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Keith. Yeah, so this year is not just really any year. It's not just a big election year. It's actually the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. 30 years when we're still dealing with these issues at polling sites. Like Keith said, the Americans with Disabilities Act does cover these places of where government services are, and it includes voting. And this is also the 18th anniversary of the Help America Vote Act, another piece of landmark voting legislation. So I think it's important that we keep this particular case in the context of the larger issue of statewide inaccessibility of polling places. Independent living centers have been doing surveys. Disability Rights New York, which is the protection advocacy organization in New York State, does surveys. There is data that a lot of these polling sites are not accessible. I mean, there's not the capacity to evaluate every site. In my own experience, last year during early voting, I was assigned to a polling site that was a relatively new building, but there was still lack of a curb cut. And, thankfully, because of early voting, I was able to be in touch with the Attorney General's office, and we were able to work with the local town that ran the town hall, and we were able to get a ramp in, and basically able to create some better access for voters. And during my time working at that polling site, we did have people come in that saw it was a new curb cut there, where they had put new material so people can get in. And there was a woman who was recently injured on crutches who said, I really needed this. So we know that there is a need in the community. We know that this is a problem, and we need people to take this seriously here in this situation near Bard, and also across the state. The issue of access also gets into voting conditions where people don't have access to parking or transportation. A lot of these polling sites have issues with that as well. So I really appreciate everyone being here and recognizing that this is an issue. Hopefully we can get more of the county boards of election to also take this as a serious issue of voter disenfranchisement that has gone on for far too long. Thank you.
So this is Catherine again. Thank you so much, Alexander. This is certainly a statewide issue that we are dealing with. We have been dealing with far too long after the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Help America Vote Act. But that does not mean that, we should let this particular instance pass. We must do better by the entire community. Next up, I would like to introduce Kathy Gawita. Kathy is both a Bard College student and an Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassador. Thank you, Kathy.
Hi, thank you so much. So good morning to everybody. Like Catherine said, my name is Kathy Gawita. I am an Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassador, as well as a team leader of Election at Bard. We are a nonpartisan student initiative that works to register, educate, and engage students at Bard College. I'm here today on behalf of the Bard College student body, as well as members of the Election at Bard team, which includes Adrian Costa, Millen Gledhill, Rain Orta, Maddie Riley, Sarah Seeger, and Sadia Saba, who is also playing a role as a plaintiff in this case to bring an on-campus polling location to Bard. The speakers before me have spoken to why the current polling location assigned to our election district simply isn't accessible to voters with disabilities, nor is it properly able to accommodate COVID precautions that we know are necessary in this incredibly important election season. I would also like to add that we are grateful to St. John's for their role in our community and having offered their space as a polling place in previous years. However, given the circumstances that have been previously mentioned, we still strongly believe that the multi-purpose room located in the Bard College Campus Center is a better suited space to accommodate not only Bard voters, but other voters within the election district. This lawsuit is not something we as a student group take lightly, nor was it our first course of action. Generations of Election at Bard leaders have fought to secure an on-campus polling place. Their efforts, along with the current pandemic, only emphasize the importance of providing students options so they can make the best voting plan for themselves and for the health and safety of their community. It's not possible, nor is it responsible for us as a team to put all of our eggs in one basket and simply assume that students will vote by mail or vote early exclusively. Although these alternatives to voting in person on election day might be feasible for some, they are not for everybody, whether that be for concerns about an absentee ballot arriving on time, whether that be a lack of access to personal transportation to actually get to an early polling location across the county, or any other reason. To dismiss the issue at hand by simply asking students to vote early does not get to the root of the problem, which is that every voting option should be presented to voters and that they should be the ones to make the decision for how they will vote. No matter the outcome of this case, Election at Bard will continue to work to ensure that students will be turning out to vote and will be doing so safely. We continue to help students apply for absentee ballots, to help them find their polling locations, and to help them in getting to the polls, whether that be through early voting or on election day. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Kathy. This is Catherine again, and I'll just remind everyone one more time that we will be open to questions at the end. Kathy, thank you so much for bringing up the point that, you know, in the time of the coronavirus pandemic, things look different and we have to be especially cognizant of what is safe and what is accessible. And that it really is up to individuals what is, you know, what voting option they will exercise, and we have to make those options available. So next, I would like to introduce to you Jonathan Becker. Jonathan is the Executive Vice President and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Bard College. Over to you, Jonathan.
Hi, I'm sharing my screen, so I'm hoping that you are seeing it all right now. Do you see the PowerPoint? Is that visible? I'm gonna.
Yes. Jonathan, your PowerPoint is visible, yes.
Great. So thank you, everyone. And I really want to thank our partners for gathering us together today. I think the main message I want to give today is that the Board of Elections has decided that with the goal of suppressing student voters, and I want to point out that it is the 50th anniversary of the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting right age in the United States, that with the goal of suppressing student voters, they're willing to ignore ADA compliance and COVID safety. And that is really unacceptable. And by the Board of Elections, I mean particularly Commissioner Eric Haight, who has consistently sought to suppress student voters. So on ADA compliance, my main point is that the Board of Elections has consistently undermined or failed to enforce the ADA with reference to this voting site. If you look, Commissioner Haight said the access survey done at the polling site doesn't identify any areas of non-compliance. And here's the survey itself, the checklist. And if you look in the upper right, you'll see all of the questions related to access in terms of ramps, parking, and so forth is listed as not applicable, not applicable, as if you didn't need a ramp to get in there. In fact, there are multiple ADA violations at the polling site in Barrytown. There's no handicap parking. The slope of the ramp, of the only accessible space into the polling site, is twice the recommended level of steepness and 20% steeper than is allowed by law. There's no edge protection, there's an insufficient landing, and there's insufficient space for the access door. So look at these photos. On the left, you have the access from the sort of regular non-handicapped entrance to the polling site, and you see it's not handicap accessible. And on the right, you'll see the ramp, which according to the BOE doesn't exist. And just to illustrate some of the measures, when you look, you see a 10% grade of slope. You see the bottom landing, which is a foot smaller than it's meant to be. You see the swinging door, which I have no idea how our friends and citizens, and this isn't only about barred voters, this is about the other citizens who vote there, could possibly enter the polling site. And you see at the top, there's no edge. So somebody who goes up the steep slope can literally go over the side and down these steps. And the important point is the board doesn't recognize any of these. The second point is about COVID safety. And very briefly, you will see that St. John's, and again, we thank our fellow colleagues at the church for opening up their space, but it is simply too small. The church itself has written to the board saying our space is too small to support much needed social distancing and don't view themselves as an appropriate place to vote in the COVID era. And here we have a space at BARD, the multi-purpose room, which is 3 times larger and fully handicap accessible. Yet for some reason, the board keeps on rejecting the idea. When we proposed moving the polling place, the Board of Elections said it makes little sense to move a polling place at the last moment in order to protect people from COVID-19. That was in September. And then the day after the judge ruled, based on their recommendation that it would be too disruptive to move the polling place, they moved 2 other polling places in the center of Red Hook for ADA, for COVID reasons. So again, if the Board of Elections is interested in voter safety, they should be moving the polling place. And they have done so responsibly in the center of Red Hook and not for us. And then the final question is, some people have asked, is BARD open for electoral activities? We understand that the canvas is highly restricted in terms of access. And the answer is yes. If you look at all of our communications, and I'm a member of our COVID response team, you will see that BARD is open for essential civic activities, including voting. In fact, because of our testing regime, I think we are perhaps the safest place in the area to host voting. So we're happy to answer more questions. But again, from our view, in terms of ADA compliance, in terms of COVID safety in particular, the board's goal is to suppress student voters, not to protect citizens with disabilities or to protect citizens as a whole from COVID. Thank you.
This is Catherine. Thank you, Jonathan, for providing those details of some of the issues with this polling site. And thank you for raising the existence of alternatives that are highly preferable to what we're working with now. And I want to emphasize the importance of some of these inaccessible features. You know, the existence of a barrier, as you know, seemingly simple as a ramp that is too steep, it can literally prevent someone from getting into a polling place, as Alexander pointed out earlier. So thank you for that. Next, I would like to introduce to you Yael Bromberg. Yael is Chief Counsel for Voting Rights for the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Over to you, Yael.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks to everyone. Thanks, I see that. Thanks to everyone who's joining us today and for your participation in support of this lawsuit, and to the media that's joining to cover this important matter. As my fellow advocate Alex Thompson mentioned earlier, it is the 18th anniversary of HAVA, it's the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's the 50th anniversary of the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18 and outlawed age discrimination with regard to access to the franchise. And yet, years later, on these seminal anniversaries, during a seminal election year, when voter participation is at an all-time high, Bard College continues to have to bang the drum to get access to the ballot on campus. Our complaint was filed on September 4th. Nothing has changed with regard to the lack of safety, the lack of accessibility for the off-campus polling location, the church polling location, which itself deems itself unsafe to host poll workers as well as voters, students and non-students alike. And therefore, we are requesting for immediate relief to get a polling station on campus on Bard College for this election cycle. And also we will be pushing for permanent relief for ongoing election cycles as well. Commissioner Haight claims that they didn't know at the time all of these issues. That simply cannot be the case. The 2019 survey that Jonathan Becker laid out earlier to us clearly demonstrates about half of the survey is blank with regard to ADA accessibility. Bard College students are facing 2 decades worth of student voter suppression. These are not new issues. And so the time has finally come. These issues were here before the pandemic, and the pandemic has only exacerbated them. And I just want to say that it is truly wonderful to see everyone together assembled to fight for the ballot together, that we really need to have a unified front on this with regard to a common sense measure to uphold our fundamental right to vote. There's 4 causes of actions listed in the complaint. They have to do with the state constitution's right to vote, the right for ADA compliance, and under election law with regard to ADA compliance, public transportation accessibility, which relates to the ADA piece as well, and also for the student access piece as well as a construction survey, which the church never filled out, which is undergoing construction in violation of New York State election law. So we're pressing for urgent expedited relief. As Jonathan Becker previously noted, the day after Commissioner Haight said to the court, and the court relied on his statements, that it is too late and too close to the election to redesignate a polling location on Bard campus. The day after the court's decision was entered based on those assertions on the record, what happened? The Board of Elections redesignated 2 polling locations. And so we're pushing, we're saying that this is further in violation of an ongoing pretext with student voter suppression. And the Andrew Goodman Foundation is proud to be a part of this lawsuit, to be a part of generations of Andrew Goodman Foundation student ambassadors that have been working with Bard College leadership to fight for access to the ballot. We are an organization dedicated to making youth voices and votes a powerful force in democracy. We're a national organization in 25 states, over 80 campuses, and we are vigilant in protecting the right to vote for students and all voters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yael. And I think no one here takes lightly the reasons why we, folks felt compelled to bring a lawsuit. These are, again, to reiterate some of the points that have already been made, we have been waiting much too long to fully exercise our rights in a safe and accessible way. We are being affected by a global pandemic that is exacerbating existing issues with access to the vote. I would like to thank again Keith Gerge, Alexander Thompson, Kathy Gawita, Jonathan Becker, and Yael again for being here today and for the support of the various organizations, to make this press conference happen. So at this point, and kind of miraculously, we ended just about on time, a little early even. I would like to open it up to questions. I'm sure folks have many. We will do our best to field them both audibly and in the chat if necessary. If they're in the chat, I'll try and read them aloud, and we'll, get the answers from the most appropriate person on the call today. So, and again, thank you to tech support and the folks helping behind the scenes. All right, we are open for questions.
I'm going to answer a question no one's asked yet while we're waiting for people. So in my classroom, I would say I'm never going to leave until people pose questions. But let me just throw something out there, which is, why does this matter? I've been at the polling site almost every election for the last nearly 20 years to review student polling rights. We've had a lot of different things going there. And every election, the poll workers have to help elderly folk or handicapped people into the polling site. Literally, they help them get up the stairs there or the ramp. And this year with COVID, that is something which should not happen. It's something which shouldn't be left to them to make a decision, which is really difficult. So you're already putting 6 people, 2 more poll workers than normal, poll watchers, people like me, and voters in a 700 square foot area. And you're saying, in order to help people who may have disabilities, you need to, physically assist them to get in the building when there should be other methods. And it's really outrageous. And again, I can't stress, this is a real thing. The decision by the board, the ADA form is so inaccurate. It is hard to imagine how anyone with any responsibility could have filled out that form. So if we're talking about a decision of the Board of Elections being arbitrary and capricious, if it's based on a false ADA form, it is by its own nature arbitrary and capricious. And it's really unfortunate how the series of decisions, which are motivated, as we've said before, by the desire to suppress student votes, is realized and causing damage in its wake for other people.
And in case I wasn't, in case I didn't say so explicitly, you are welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question.
Katie, there's a question for you in the chat. Katie.
All right, so the question in the chat is, how long will it take to get the BARD polling site up and running? Does anyone here feel, is anyone here able to answer that question?
Were we selected as the polling site, it would take less time than at the church because there's more space to set up. So I would say no time at all. We know that the space we've identified, which will be restricted from regular access that day and which is fully handicap accessible, is ready to accept machines and be set up immediately. And I will remind folk that the church itself, St. John's, again, who have been very generous with us, they've just undergone a reconstruction. So I'm not sure how long or difficult it will be to set up there, but it will be no longer than it would take at the current location to set up the site.
We should also probably emphasize the safety specifically as offered by the expert in our case, which is Dr. Keesing, who is a biology professor at Bard, who said that she attested without contradiction by the opposing side that the church is 4 times likelier to generate a transmission of COVID than the Bard location.
And this is the great irony, because 2 polling places were moved to the center of Red Hook, presumably after stating in their thing that they don't think it's appropriate to move for COVID safety. They moved 2 other polling places in the center of town for COVID safety, and then leaving this one there. And Dr. Keesing, by the way, she's an amazing scientist. She's done federal studies on COVID transmission vis-a-vis liberal arts colleges. So she's truly an expert, and took into account the depth and airflow and other aspects of a prospective polling site.
Katie, you have another question in the chat.
So this is, thank you. So like so many other places, Bard College has taken measures to protect its community during the global pandemic. And so we have a question: how does the Bard campus closure affect the polling site? Presumably the polling site that's being put forward as the preferable, more accessible one.
So let me take this on, because again, I'm a member of the Bard COVID response team. It does not change the position of the polling site at all. The president's message has made very clear that we're still open for essential activities, including civic activities, the first and foremost of which is voting. We have taken amazing precautions to make sure that anyone coming to campus to vote would be as safe and secure as possible, and would minimize the possibility of transmission. For us, the real question, so institutionally, our policies for several months have stated very clearly that we consider voting an essential civic activity, and that we are open for essential civic activities. So nothing has changed on that front. The real question, which I think is important, is students and other voters will mix somewhere. Is it better for that mixing to occur in a 700 square foot facility, which is non-handicap accessible, or a 2,200 square foot facility, which is handicap accessible? Students, other citizens, and poll workers will mix somewhere. It's clear that Bard is a better place to hold this, and the institution has made very clear that we are open for voting and welcome a polling site on campus, despite other restrictions that might be going on.
Katie, you have another question in the chat.
Thank you for helping me unmute. My device seems to want to keep me muted. So we have another question, which is that the 26th Amendment was referenced by legal counsel. Could legal counsel expand on this more? And I'll just take a moment to say it's not lost on me that one of our federal voting rights protections, HAVA, is now 18 years old. And so if it were a person, it would be eligible to vote. So I think, Yael, that question.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the idea that we kind of lifted up earlier, that this is, all of these seminal anniversaries are coming to a fold this year. The 26th Amendment was ratified 50 years ago. It's the quickest amendment to be ratified in United States history. It lowered the voting age to 18 and outlawed age discrimination on account of access to the ballot, on account of age. I'm sorry, it outlawed age discrimination with regard to access to the ballot. One of the reasons for its quick ratification was the large and incredible cross-partisan support for this effort. It was passed unanimously in the Senate, nearly unanimously in the House, and rounded the requisite 38 states in less than 100 days to become a part of our Constitution. And so, this bipartisan, cross-partisan piece of it, I always lift up, because it means that access to the ballot with regard to age specifically is something that, the United States came together in unity around. And I have a lot of scholarship. I could talk about this topic for hours, but I think I'll leave it at that. And if anyone has any more questions, and we have a lot of resources also on the Andrew Goodman Foundation website, if you'd like to take a look at some of the work we've been developing around student voting rights and around the 26th Amendment specifically. It's also a part of my legal scholarship. I've been publishing on this.
So this is Katie. I see that we have more questions. Before I turn to those, I just want to raise again what Keith started us off with, which was the existence of a sign-on letter. The support for moving this polling site goes beyond the organizations and individuals represented here. In addition to those here, we have support from ADAPT Downstate of New York, a grassroots disability rights organization, Disabled in Action of Metropolitan New York, and Taconic Resources for Independence, which, like Resource Center for Accessible Living, is a center for independent living. This sign-on letter calls on the Board of Elections to exercise its ability under state law to move the polling site, to change its approval processes internally so that inaccessible locations like this are no longer approved, that it also work with local centers for independent living, which are a resource that is not going away and have been around for a while, which can help identify venues that are accessible and identify issues that are of concern to seniors and people with disabilities. And then finally, we call on the Board of Elections to ensure that all ballots cast in this election be counted. So I will leave you with that and turn to our next question, which is,
can you take Hank Gross's
how
question?
will voter,
Take Hank Gross's question first.
yes, sure. So since the state Supreme Court ruled against the BARD effort, are you appealing that to a higher court?
As of right now, we've submitted a motion for leave to renew and re-argue, which is currently pending before the state Supreme Court judge, which, as most of you probably know, in New York is the trial level judge. And then we'll determine where we need to go from there from a legal strategy perspective. But we are vigilant and fighting for this issue.
Thank you. So our next question is, how will voters be notified of the polling location change?
It would be the same way that they're being notified with regard to the relocation of the 2 other polling stations, which is, even just a public posting at the church is permissible pursuant to state law for changes to polling locations leading up to election day. But there's a plethora of ways in which the county Board of Elections has already notified voters with regard to the other 2 changes, and we would simply replicate them here.
And could I add that it's important to note that 65 to 70% of voters in the district are BARD students, faculty, or their families. So immediately, who could walk safely to the polling station if it moved to BARD. So immediately, you've solved that problem. Since no one can walk other than the immediate neighbor to the church, and since there's no public transportation there, although there is to BARD, anyone who goes to the church is going to be in a car anyhow, and we're a straight shoot 1.7 miles away, I believe, on the same road. So the main point is people can be informed, but already the vast majority of voters are already affiliated with the BARD campus. So the number of people who will be inconvenienced is not so high. I am a voter in one of the districts that moved already, and I've already received notice that district has moved, and it wasn't that complicated.
All right, I have one more question. I'm taking prerogative to add a question to the list here, which is actually for Keith. So Keith talked about you talked about your personal experience, what it takes, what has to be in place for you to vote accessibly in person. You mentioned the ballot marking device and sip and puff. And so people should know that there is an absentee ballot option available to all eligible voters right now because of the pandemic. Could you just comment on on the effect on you if you were unable to get into a polling site and you had to rely on this absentee ballot process right now? I understand that there are some issues.
Right. So this year I am opting the absentee ballot option. In previous years I did go to the site and use the BMD, but I have to put my mouth on the straw, interact with people. So I'm staying home. So, and I did mention that New York has taken a step towards more accessibility, allowing individuals with print disabilities, they're referred to as, to fill out their absentee ballots on a fillable PDF, save that, and then they have to have it printed, and the Board of Elections mails them the attestation envelope that which I just did it yesterday. So I sign it with a pen in my mouth, and obviously someone needs to help me put it in the envelope and put it in the mail. So we're not fully there yet in terms of voting accessibility, but that's my experience so far. I think it's a little improved. So I can privately and independently at least mark it and not need someone else to do that. I don't know if I lost part of that question, but the pandemic has definitely altered things in terms of not going to the polls. But if I couldn't get in, like if I had a polling site change on me all of a sudden and that one wasn't accessible, which why would that happen? But you never know. Then I wouldn't be able to vote. I don't know what my options would be if I decided to go on election day and not be able to get in. I don't know if I could designate someone to go in there for me, but it's unknown.
Thank you, Keith. That's really important for us to note that not only as Kathy talked about, is it important for everyone to be able to choose among the options that are available to us, but it's also not fair or sensical to say right now that the absentee ballot system is actually available to everyone. A lot has to happen for you to be able to access an absentee ballot. The absentee ballot is not fully accessible to blind and low vision voters yet. And so, we're just simply not there yet. And so these options are, they must be available to us. So we have one, Erin, you are welcome to speak. You're asking to make a comment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Kinnahan. I'm Vice President for Student Affairs and the Dean for Civic Engagement. I was actually on the college's response team meeting, and so that's why I was a little late. I'm actually working the poll. I've been working at the poll now for the last 10 years. And I just want to comment on the accessibility issues that I have seen as a poll worker. The size of the church doesn't allow for real privacy. So in Keith's example, where you're coming and attempting to vote, physically that is set up just behind where we do the intake. So typically within, I would say, a 6-foot range, you have the intake table, voters waiting in line, people trying to both get their ballot and then get to the privacy booth. While we might also be making calls to the Board of Elections if there's an issue with a voter. That's all happening within a 6-foot area. So voters really who are requiring assistance don't have privacy at the current site as it's set up. And regardless of the issues of mobility getting in and out, there's a real issue, I think, with just general issues. We have had hearing impaired voters who they cannot hear in the space because everybody's jammed up. And so in terms of mobility, there's an issue, but in trying to help voters access the polls, just sort of generally, it is very difficult to do that in this space because there are people really literally sometimes on top of each other. We'll have people out the door. We may be able to fit about 30 voters in line if they're all jammed up, and then about 5 voters in the privacy booths at once. But there isn't really space to do the work that we need to do as we're trying to have people flow through. So obviously outside of COVID, our concern has always been that the space isn't ideal, and from all the areas that we're talking about, it really contributes to the issues at hand.
Thank you so much, Erin, for joining us to share that additional piece of this issue. It is really wonderful to have poll workers like yourself on board with what we're trying to do. And as a blind woman, I especially appreciate the privacy element. I use a ballot marking device, and I have voted in person at poll sites where the device was positioned so that the screen faced the door, so people walking behind me could have seen what I was doing if I had the ballot displaying on the screen. In those cases, I would just move the device myself, but it is definitely an issue. So I'm going to wrap us up unless there are any pressing problems or issues. There is contact information in the chat for myself and for some of the other folks on here. And of course, there was the press advisory with contact information. Again, thank you to everyone who took the time out of your day to be here today. Please vote, make your voting plan, and thank you.
Thank you all for coming.